Vacuum tubes are pretty much the lifeblood of almost everything that's going on this channel. Whether you're using electric guitars, effects pedals, invariably all these are going into some form of tube amp, at least with what we're featuring on this channel. Now last week, Electro-Harmonix and Mike Matthews put out a PSA to all of their customers talking about the potential shortage for tubes to no longer be exported, knowing that all the tubes that they manufacture through the New Sensor Corporation are all done out of Russia, and with the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, the export of those tubes are now no longer going to be possible. Now, by issuing that statement, and I think further fanning the flames with people on YouTube making videos talking about the scarcity, and maybe talking about people needing to stock up on tubes right at this very moment, we saw things like tube prices increase, we saw a lot of places selling out, and we saw some people even attempting to do a little bit of price gouging on some of the online forums, whether that's eBay, Reverb, and other used sources or secondhand sources or reselling sources of buying tubes. But I want to talk about today what the alternatives are and how you might go about getting tubes if there is in fact a real scarcity. Now, we've yet to see how this actually plays out in real time and whether this scarcity is going to be as bad as they say. We'll go through some of the different components of this. We'll also talk about other manufacturers of tubes that are not based in Russia. There also is some misunderstandings about exactly where tubes are made and which tube factories are still open and available to get tubes from. So we're going to clarify some of that, and I think more importantly, hear from somebody that's actually a manufacturer. For the most part, what I've seen in terms of people making commentary on this are people that are YouTubers but are not actually manufacturing products that use tubes, or that are requiring products that use tubes in order to use our products with, such as guitar effects pedals, as we manufacture at Vertex. So this will give maybe a little bit more of a manufacturer's perspective, and maybe some reasons to not freak out so much, and maybe not to just go into a crazy buying frenzy of all the available tubes that are out there. So let's go through this, let's do some real talk, and let's really make sense of actually what is known and the information that we have available to us at this point in time, and then how that might impact what you do moving forward with your tube amps. So let's first talk about modern tube production. Now, there's multiple places that make tubes. China being one of them, Russia being another, and then Slovakia being another. As far as I know, there aren't any other locations in the world that are making tubes other than those places. From what we know now, Russia is no longer going to be an option for us, which is part of the reason why Electro-Harmonix had made that statement. But JJs are still made outside of Russia and Slovakia. And in China, there are more than one factory that are making tubes, and only one of those factories burned down. There's still another factory that makes tubes, so there's still going to be a way to get tubes out of China. So that does provide us at least two resources that we know of that are able to produce tubes. Now, my suspicion is that the big corporations like Marshall and Fender and Vox and Orange are going to probably try to get as much of those tubes as possible because their manufacturing and production is highly dependent upon the availability of those tubes. So we may see fewer separate tubes or individual tubes for repair or replacement on the market that were formerly available up until this time. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that tubes are going to be impossible to get or won't exist. Now, knowing all this about the availability of tubes, what can we do about getting tubes if we can't use the conventional methodologies? Well, one thing I didn't hear anybody talking about, which is actually a really easy way to kind of kill two birds with one stone, and not only getting vintage or NOS tubes, but also getting them relatively inexpensively, is almost every week, at least where I'm located in California, I see free ads for church organs, many of which are replete with 12AX7s, 6L6s, many of the tube complements that we use in at least most American amplifiers. And most of the time, these churches are either asking for very minimal amounts of money to take the organ off their hands, and in some cases, they're just listing it for free, and they just want really somebody to take it away. Often, I will contact these churches, and I will offer them a dump fee for whatever it takes to take the organ to the dump, or just a fee to harvest the tubes from. Because often, because these have so many tubes in them, even if only half of them are working, you're often left with a lot of preamp tubes on your hands, sometimes even dozens in some cases, depending on what the model of organ is, and several different power tubes in addition to that. So this can be often a $1,000 plus score in a lot of senses. Sometimes I'll even take a tube tester with me to at least get a baseline of what might be working by the time I get it home. And this can be a good and easy way for you to not only get good tubes, but old vintage NOS tubes. And typically these NOS tubes are much better made than what's coming out now. A lot of these American-made tubes are very robust. They were made for industrial contexts, especially if you're getting, older 5881s or 6550s or KT66s or KT88s. These are really, really well-made tubes and are going to often outlive the currently made tubes by 2 or 3 times the amount of time. So even an old one that had some use to it may still be totally functional and last you in your amp, at least to the point in time where tubes are more readily available, and some of these shortages that were caused by this conflict are able to be resolved. We're able to get tubes more easily, and we can, again, retube our amps exactly the way that they were intended to be. Now, where this plays in, if you have a Marshall, let's say, that takes EL34 tubes, how can you use these American tubes? There actually is a way to do it, and most people actually didn't realize that most Marshalls that were exported into the US for many years actually came with American tubes, because EL34s weren't something that were easily gotten here in the United States. And so when service technicians would work on these amps, they would need to be able to have serviceable tubes to use with them. So a lot of times you'd see 6550s or 5881s or 6L6s in a lot of these classic Marshall amplifiers, especially in the 70s JMP era when they were exported to the United States in larger volumes. So you can convert a lot of those older Marshalls to be able to take those American style tubes and not have to use EL34s. And sometimes this can just be a matter of replacing a screen resistor, and sometimes it can just be a matter of replacing the tubes and just changing the bias, and that will solve the problem and allow you to actually use an NOS style tube or a newer American style tube in the suggested way that I talked about of harvesting from some old church organs and using those in a Marshall amplifier. And although that may not be ideal for the exact sound that you want, at least your amplifier can be functional until the tube shortage is resolved. Now, actually, as I'm recording this in this very moment, I was just notified that Electro-Harmonix has walked back a little bit of their original statement and said that they're going to be able to now get some tubes in, at least in some sort of volume in a temporary sense. So I think this does go to show that maybe there was somewhat more of a reactionary response that was posted, and that people posting about it maybe created a little bit more of a brouhaha that maybe, I don't know, Electro-Harmonix maybe talk with their manufacturers, or maybe Electro-Harmonix was trying to maybe be overly cautious about the situation in Russia and not knowing exactly how it was going to evolve. But we can even see, again, in this amount of time, in this short, less than a week-long period, there's already been a reversal. So I think that there actually was a little bit, potentially, of a little bit of scarcity tactics used, a little bit of fear-mongering used that maybe had people buy tubes prematurely. But I do think it also is something to be considerate of, especially as the situation with Russia and the Ukraine continues to evolve. And this may affect the superficial things that we care about, like tube amps. And these solutions can still work. And I think probably, again, one of the best ones that I was able to think of is the church organ situation. If you're not able to find new tubes at a reasonable price, this is a good way to do it. So all in all, I think what we can say is maybe there is going to be some tube shortages, and maybe we can say that this was just a dress rehearsal for maybe some future tube shortages that may come. I think, though, we have some good solutions as far as what we can do. Obviously, I don't think that you should go and start spending a lot more money for the tubes that you would normally get and going and buying them at a higher price from a lot of the retailers or eBay or Reverb. I think you should be more conservative on that as a last resort. So thanks for watching. I hope this maybe settled you a little bit, again, with this new information that just came out again as we were filming about tubes actually going to be a little bit more available than originally thought from Electro-Harmonix. I hope that that sort of settles you a little bit and gives you some alternatives of what you might do if you get stuck and you really do need tubes, you need to retube your amp, or you need to convert your amp to a different type of tube. But these things are possible. Of course, see a certified technician for these amplifiers to make sure that this is implemented properly. I don't recommend, unless you really know how to do this stuff, to make these changes yourself. And if you like this video, if you found it helpful, if you kind of found it to maybe balance some of the information that's out there, I highly recommend you give us a thumbs up, you like, You comment, you tell me what you think about this quick 180 change with Electro-Harmonix. And if you want to support what we're doing further, you can always go over to my website, vertexeffects.com, where we sell all of our guitar pedals as well as all the dealerships that sell our pedals, or head over to therigdr.com, where we sell all of our cables and supplies for all the pedal board builds, or go listen to our podcast for free over on all the common podcatchers. We have our brand new podcast, Chairman of the Boards, where me, Brian O'Million from A Million Audio, and Grant Klassen from Goodwood Audio are all getting together, talking about rigs, talking about how to do it best, and giving a lot of great information to listeners and viewers just like you. Until next time, I'm Mason Marangella from Vertex Effects, aka The Rig Doctor. Thanks for having this discussion with me on Tubes. See ya.